Ericthonius. He is the same as Ericthus. Homer knew only one man of that name. Plato speaks of two. He was the son of Hephaestus. Reared by Athena, half man, half serpent, Athena gave a chest in which she had put the infant to the three daughters of Cecrops, forbidding them to open it. They did open it, however, and saw in it the serpent-like creature. Athena drove them mad as a punishment, and they killed themselves, jumping from the Acropolis. When Ericthonius grew up, he became king of Athens. His grandson was called by his name, and was the father of the second Cecrops, Procris, Creusa, and Orthaia. Hero and Leander. Leander was a youth of Abycus, a town in Hellespont, and Merope was priestess of Aphrodite in Cestus. On the opposite shore, every night Leander swam across to her, guided by the light. Some say the lighthouse in Cestus, some of a torch Hero always set blazing on the top of a tower. One very stormy night, the light was blown out by the wind, and Leander perished. His body was washed up on the shore, and Hero, finding it, killed herself. All these people killed themselves. You know, there's more to do in life than that's worth waiting to see, right? Hyades. The Hyades were the daughters of Atlas and half-sisters of the Pleiades. They were the rainy stars supposed to bring rain, because the time of the evening and morning setting, which comes in early May and November, is usually raining. They were 6 in number. Dionysus, as a baby, was entrusted to them by Zeus, and to reward them for their care, he set them among the stars. Now, in what as black of a sky as you can get, one of the ancient tests of eyesight was how many stars of the Pleiades could you see. Some people claimed up to 100. We know there's more than that, but 12 was actually a more common number, that I can see 12 of them. And of course you'd have to show the pattern that you're seeing, right? Ibycus and the Cranes. He is not a mythological character, but a poet who lived about 550 BCE. Only a few fragments of his poems have come down to us. All that is known of him is the dramatic story of his death. He was attacked by robbers near Corinth and mortally wounded. A flock of cranes flew by overhead, and he called them on them to avenge him. Soon after, over the open theater in Corinth, where a play was being performed to a full house, a flock of cranes appeared, hovering above the crowd. Suddenly a man's voice was heard. He cried out as if panic-stricken, "The cranes of Ibycus, the avengers!" The audience in turn shouted, "The murderer has informed against himself." The man was seized, the other robbers discovered, and all put to death. Leto, or Latona. She was the daughter of the Titans Phoebe and Coeus. Zeus loved her, but when she was about to bear a child, he abandoned her, afraid of Hera. All countries and islands, afraid for the same reason, refused to receive her and give her a place where her child could be born. On and on she wandered in desperation, until she reached a bit of land which was floating on the sea. It had no foundation, but was tossed hither and thither by waves and winds. It was called Delos, and besides being, of all islands, the most insecure, it was rocky and barren. But when Leto set foot on it and asked for refuge, the little isle welcomed her gladly, and at that moment 4 lofty pillars rose from the bottom of the sea and held it firmly anchored forever. There Leto's children were born, Artemis and Phoebus Apollo, and in after years Apollo's glorious temple stood there, visited by men from all over the world. The barren rock was called the Heaven-Built Isle, and from being the most despised, it became the most renowned of islands. Getting rumbly and tumbly. Linus. In the Iliad, a vineyard is described with youths and maidens singing as they gather the fruit, a sweet Linus song. This is probably a lament for the young son of Apollo and Psamathe. Linus, who was deserted by his mother, brought up by shepherds, and brought before the full-grown, and before he was full-grown, torn to pieces by dogs. This Linus was like Adonis and Hyacinthus, a type of all lovely young life that dies or is withered before it has borne fruit. The Greek word inon, meaning woe for Linus, grew to mean no more than the English alas, and was used in any lament. There was another Linus, the son of Apollo and Muse, who taught Orpheus and tried to teach Hercules, but was killed by him. Marpessa. She was more fortunate than other maidens beloved of those entities considered to be gods. Edith, one of the heroes of the Caledonian hunt, and also of the Argonauts, carried her off from her father. With her consent, they would have lived happily ever after, but Apollo fell in love with her. Edith refused to give her up. He even dared to fight with Apollo for her. Zeus parted them and told Marpessa to choose which she would have. She chose the mortal, fearing, certainly not without reason, that the entity would not be faithful to her. The entity considered to be a god would not be faithful to her. Marsyas. The flute was invented by Athena, but she threw it away because in order to play it, she had to puff out her cheeks and disfigure her face. Marsyas, a satyr, found it and played so enchantingly upon it that he dared to challenge Apollo to a contest. Apollo won, of course, and punished Marsyas by flaying him. Melanpus. He saved and reared 2 little snakes. When his servants killed the parent snakes, and as pets, they repaid him well. Once, when he was asleep, they crept upon his couch and licked his ears. He started up in a great fright, but he found that he understood what the 2 birds on his window sill were saying to each other. The snakes had made him able to understand the language of all flying and all creeping creatures. He learned in this way the art of divination as no one ever had, and he became a famous soothsayer. He saved himself, too, by his knowledge. His enemies once captured him and kept him a prisoner in a little cell. While there he heard the worms saying that the roof beam had been almost gnawed through. so that it would soon fall and crush all beneath it. At once he told his captors and asked to be moved elsewhere. They did as he said, and directly afterward the roof fell in, and then they saw how great a diviner he was, and that they freed and rewarded him. And snakes. Snakes is a very common reference to the fallen angels. The jinn, the fire beings, the invisible beings. Fire beings and invisible beings are the most common ways to describe them. Well, hidden beings. And snakes is often a way that they speak about them, so. But those are what they call gods and goddesses, well, at least some of them. Vast majority don't really get treated like that ever. Merope, her husband, Cresphontes, a son of Hercules and king of Messenia, was killed in a rebellion together with 2 of his sons. The man who succeeded him, Polyphontes, took her as his wife, but her 3rd son, Ibycus, had been killed by her in Arcadia. He returned years later pretending to be a man who had slain Ibycus and was kindly received, therefore, by Polyphontes. His mother, however, not knowing who he was, planned to kill her son's murderer, as she thought him. However, in the end, she found out who he was, and the 2 together brought about Polyphontes' death. Ibycus became the king. The Myrmidons. These were men created from ants on the island of Aegina in the reign of Ibycus, Achilles' grandfather, and they were Achilles' followers in the Trojan War. Not only were they thrifty and industrious, as one might suppose from their origin, but they were also brave. They were changed into men from ants because of one of Hera's attacks of jealousy. Now, there's reason to think that there was a tribe that Solomon encountered that was also known as the ants, and this is actually established historically that such a tribe existed. So kind of relate that they were changed into ants because of one of Hera's attacks of jealousy. Yeah. She was angry because Zeus loved Aegina, the maiden for whom the island was named, and whose son Ibycus became the king. Hera sent a fearful pestilence which destroyed the people by thousands. It seemed that no one would be left alive. Ibycus climbed to the lofty temple of Zeus and prayed to him, reminding him that he was his son and the son of a woman the entity had loved. As he spoke, he saw a troop of busy ants. "O Father," he cried, "make of these creatures a people for me as numerous as they, and fill my empty city." A peal of thunder seemed to answer him, and at night he dreamed that he saw the ants being transformed into human shape. At daybreak his son Telamon woke him, saying that a great host of men was approaching the palace. He went out and saw a multitude, as many as the ants in number, all crying out that they were his faithful subjects. So Aegina was repopulated from an anthill, and its people were called Myrmidons, after the ant. Myrmex, from which they had sprung. And Myrmex, doesn't that relate to our word for mermaid? Nisus and Scylla. Nisus, king of Megara, had on his head a purple lock of hair, which he had been warned never to cut. The safety of his throne depended on his preserving it. Minos of Crete laid siege to his city, but Nisus knew that no harm would come to it as long as he had the purple lock. His daughter, Scylla, used to watch Minos from the city wall, and she fell madly in love with him. She could think of no way to make him care for her, except by taking her father's lock of hair to him, and enabling him to conquer the town. She did this. She cut it from her father's head in his sleep, and carrying it to Minos, she confessed what she had done. He shrank from her in horror and drove her out of his sight. When the city had been conquered, and the Cretans launched their ships to sail home, she came rushing to the shore, mad with passion, and leaping into the water, seized the rudder of the boat that carried Minos. But at this moment a great eagle swooped down upon her. It was her father, whom the entities had saved by changing him into a bird. In terror, she let go her hold, and would have fallen into the water, but suddenly she too became a bird. Some entity had pity on her, traitor though she was, because she had sinned through love. Now, wouldn't think that love would be the sin, but, well, maybe a euphemism. Orion. He was a young man of gigantic stature and great beauty, and a mighty hunter. He fell in love with the daughter of the king of Chaos, and for the love of her he cleared the island of wild beasts. The spoils of the chase he brought always home to his beloved, whose name is sometimes said to be Aro, sometimes Merope. Her father, Oenopion, agreed to give her to Orion, but he kept putting the marriage off. One day, when Orion was drunk, he insulted the maiden, and Oenopion appealed to Dionysus to punish him. The entity threw him into a deep sleep, and Oenopion blinded him. An oracle told him, however, that he would be able to see again if he went to the east and let the rays of the rising sun fall on his eyes. He went as far east as Lemnos, and there he recovered his sight. Instantly he started back to Chios to take vengeance on the king, and he had fled, and Orion could not find him. I guess most people say it as Orion. That doesn't seem like a Greek pronunciation. He went on to Crete and lived there as Artemis's huntsman. Nevertheless, in the end, the female entity killed him. Some say that Dawn, also called Aurora, loved him, and that Artemis, in jealousy and anger, shot him. Others say that he made Apollo angry, and that the entity, by a trick, got his sister to slay him. After his death, he was placed in heaven as a constellation, which shows him with a girdle, sword, club, and lion's skin. It's interesting that in America, when Orion kind of indicates sort of pointing north, that doesn't the belt kind of point northeast, so Mecca and Jerusalem and stuff like this? It helps the person, the approximate direction, you know. The Pleiades. They were the daughters of Atlas, 7 in number. Their names were Electra, Maia, Taigete, Alcyon, Merope, Calano, Sterope. And I think maybe 11 is the most... 11 is a number that appears in myths of this too, which I've seen 11 stars in a, Eastern Oregon or something, for the Pleiades, Orion pursued them, but they fled before him, and he could never seize any of them. Still he continued to follow them until Zeus, pitying them, placed them in the heavens as stars. But it was said that even there Orion continued his pursuit, always unsuccessful yet persistent. While they lived on earth, one of them, Maia, was the mother of Hermes. Another, Electra, was the mother of Dardanus, the founder of the Trojan race. Although it is agreed that there were 7 of them, only 6 stars were clearly visible. The 7th is invisible except to those who have special keen sight. Ebikas, seeing an oak about to fall, propped it up. The dryad, who would have perished with it, told him to ask anything he desired, and she would give it. He answered that he wanted only her love, and she consented. She bade him keep on the alert, for she would send him a messenger, a bee, to tell him her wishes. But Ebikas met some companions, and forgot all about the bee, so much so that when he heard one buzzing he drove it away, and heard it returning to the tree. He was blinded by the Dryad, who was angry at the disregard of her words and the injury to her messenger. Salmoneus. This man was another illustration of how fatal it was for mortals to try to emulate what they considered to be gods. What he did was so foolish, however, that in later years it was often said that he had gone mad. He pretended that he was Zeus. He had a chariot made in such a way that there was a loud clanging of brass when it moved. On the day of Zeus's festival he drove it furiously through the town, scattering at the same time firebrands and shouting to the people to worship him because he was Zeus the Thunderer. But instantly there came a crash of actual thunder and a flash of lightning. Salmoneus fell from his chariot dead. The story is often explained as pointing to a time when weather magic was practiced. Salmoneus, according to this view, was a magician trying to bring on a rainstorm by imitating it, a common magical method. Now, this myth is after the historical King Solomon, and people were trying to implement different types of magic during that time, and so I can't help but think this is a Greek version of the Solomon thing, and Solomonic magic when Christianity, with Greek as its central language, came to center stage. Certain traditions started to build there. Sisyphus was king of Corinth. One day he chanced to see a mighty eagle, greater and more splendid than any mortal bird, bearing a maiden to an island not far away. When the river entity Sisyphus came to him to tell him that his daughter Aegina had been carried off, he strongly suspected Zeus, and to ask his help in finding her. Sisyphus told him what he had seen. Thereby he drew down on himself the relentless wrath of Zeus. In Hades he was punished by having to try forever to roll a rock uphill, which forever rolled back upon him. Nor did he help Sisyphus, the river entity. Went to the island, but Zeus drove him away with his thunderbolt. The name of the island was changed to Aegina in honor of the maiden, and her son Ibycus was the grandfather of Achilles, who was called sometimes Hyades, descendant of Ibycus. Tyro was the daughter of Salmoneus. She bore twin sons to Poseidon, but fearing her father's displeasure if he learned of the children's birth, she abandoned them. They were found by the keeper of Salmoneus's horses, and brought up by him and his wife, who called one Pleiades, and the other Melanpus. Tyro's husband, Ericthonius, discovered years later what her relations with Poseidon had been. In great anger he put her away and married one of her maids, Tyro, who ill-treated her. When Ericthonius died, the twins were told by their foster mother who their real parents were. They went at once to seek out Tyro and discover themselves to her. They found her living in great misery, and so they looked for Tyro to punish her. She had heard of their arrival, and she had taken refuge in Hera's temple. Nevertheless, Pleiades slew her, defying the female entity's anger. Hera revenged herself, but only after many years. Pleiades' half-brother, the son of Tyro and Ericthonius, was the father of Jason, whom Pleiades tried to kill by sending him after the Golden Fleece, and since Jason was indirectly the cause of his death, he was killed by his daughters under the direction of Medea, Jason's wife. And aside from magic and, the prophet role, definitely. And communication and metal, people working metal and people working stone. Solomon and David, their house, they were known for their stables. I'm talking historically. Now, historically, you can't prove that either of them were prophets.